What's up, military millionaires? Today we're going to answer the question, are VA loans assumable? And if so, how to do it? Right after this intro. Now I'm going to spoil the goods and tell you, yes, they are. But there's a whole lot of if this, then that, and whatever. And this is actually something that's really cool that I think is going to be, for the first time in a long time, become a really viable option for a lot of people. In fact, we're seeing it start to trend. And so I got asked this a lot over the last couple of weeks. And in true form, when I start getting asked the same question a lot in my Facebook group, I'm like, I need to do a lot of research, write an article. So down in the comments, you'll see that I link to an article. Now, originally I was like, yeah, all right, like 1,000-word, 1,500-word article about this that should answer the basic points. And that turned into like, I don't know, a 3,000-word monstrosity that took me like 3 or 4 days worth of research. And I had like 15 tabs open and was just like cross-referencing things and going through guidelines, and it just... So that's why you're getting kind of the more informal setting. I haven't done a video like this in a little while where it's like a informal, kind of laid back, chilling at the desk. And there's two reasons for this. One, when I went to log on to my computer this morning, my wireless mouse was dead because I forgot to put it on the charger, which I only have to do like once a month. But when I went to Pensacola for the week, and so obviously now it's just charging and I had nothing else to do. So I was going to record the video anyway today, so I'm like, well, I might as well record it now, but I can't use any of my notes from my laptop, my computer, so here we are. And number two, because the blog post was so long that had I actually thrown it on the teleprompter and read it back to you guys like I do with a lot of blogs, I mean, we're talking, this would have been like a 25, 30-minute video, potentially. And I don't know about you, but I ain't got that kind of attention span. Like, that's a borderline podcast. Longer than some people's podcasts, rambling on about the assumptions. So I've got 2 sticky notes of bullet points, and I got my cell phone with the Google Doc. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the bullet points that I think are like the most important ones. And then I'm going to reference and just kind of read some of the notes that are key, like data points off of the blog post. And so it'll be informal, right? I'm going to pick up my phone and kind of to make sure I'm not missing like the important data points. And it's going to be informal because, you know, it was either film it right now while the computer's done, or I twiddle my thumbs while I wait for that to happen, and then by that time I'm going to have a whole bunch of things that have to be done on the computer, and I'm not going to get to the video today. So what you see is what you get. This is how life works sometimes. So we're going to dig into it right now. We're going to lead off with, I guess the first thing should be, what is a mortgage assumption? So assuming a loan, this is actually really cool because this is creative financing, right? Like, people don't think about it this way, but this is creative financing. So let's say I bought a house 2 years ago, use a VA loan, 2.5% interest or whatever, we'll say 3% interest. And now I'm moving across country, and that loan was, we'll just say it was a $200,000 mortgage. And I still owe, I don't know, $190,000 on it. And I'm now moving, and my house is worth $250,000. And I want to sell my house for $250,000. But interest rates are now like 8%. And so I could sell it for $250,000 and normal interest rates, whatever, and that's fine. People can buy it, that's great. And that might just happen. But if a buyer came to me and said, hey, I would love if I could take over your $190,000 mortgage that is a 3% interest rate that you're already 2 years into, so I'd only have 28 years left on the amortization cycle. Can I do that? And I'll pay you $60,000 down. That's a mortgage assumption. As long as the mortgage company approves it, which with the VA loan, as long as the VA approves it, right, as long as you meet the criteria, which we'll get into, generally they're going to, then that's a win-win, right? I as the buyer, or he as the buyer, or they as the buyer, or them, or he, or they, or she, or whatever pronoun, whatever, however, that person is going to assume that loan 28 years into or 2 years into a 30-year amortization cycle of $190,000 remaining on an original $200,000 note at that fixed 3% rate, and then they have put $60,000 into, you know, the purchase, right? Now you got to bring cash to close on that case. It's not going to be zero down with the VA. Now that we'll get into some creative stuff later, there are ways to do that. But that's the basis of a mortgage assumption. You're taking over the existing mortgage at the existing rate to avoid that higher interest rate that we're currently seeing. You got to bring some cash to make it work, but that rate is very valuable. Win-win. Cool. So VA loans, yeah, they're assumable. Cool. Criteria. This is the first piece of the puzzle here. So in order for a VA, this is from the seller's side. So in order for the VA to even think about approving your mortgage being assumed by a buyer as the seller, the existing loan must be current. Or if there was a past due amount, it must be paid in full before the closing. So you cannot use the proceeds of the closing to make the loan current. You have to make it current before the closing of the property. The buyer, assuming all mortgage obligations, including repaying the VA if they default on the loans, the buyer has to be okay with that. The original owner or new owner must pay a funding fee. So the new funding fee is 0.5%, which is actually way less than like a funding fee on any other mortgage, let alone, or origination fee on any other mortgage, let alone the VA. So like people are like, oh yeah, but you got to remember the funding fee. Look, if you get a mortgage of any type, of any product, for any loan to purchase any property ever, whether it's an investment loan or a conventional loan, FHA, USDA, doctor loan, VA loan, I mean, I do not care. Unless you are a VA loan with a Purple Heart or 10% disability where it's waived, with the exception of that criteria, there's not a loan out there that I know of where the origination fee or funding fee or whatever else they want to call it is less than 0.5%. So I don't want to hear it. Buyer must qualify for the existing mortgage based on credit and income guidelines, which we'll get into. And a processing fee must be paid in advance for the cost of pulling the buyer's credit fee. So basically like, the $25-50 to apply for the mortgage, like process, like check your credit, whatever. Normal stuff, right? Nothing crazy. So who can assume the VA loan? Realistically, anybody, as long as you meet the criteria. So a veteran or a service member can assume it, but also a civilian can assume it, right? So that's a common misconception, and I was going to dig into it later, but I'll just talk about it right now. So if somebody who is eligible for the VA loan and has remaining entitlement assumes let's say I'm the seller. If I'm selling my home and a service member or veteran assumes my loan, then their entitlement can and will replace my entitlement. Now there's a document you have to make sure you hang on. When a VA loan is assumed by another eligible veteran, entitlement typically does not need to be transferred and can simply be exchanged between the buyer and seller. Substitution of entitlement. So you just have to file a substitution of entitlement with the VA. As long as you do that, boom, I'm like, high five, you get my mortgage, substitution of entitlements filed, so you're taking my entitlement. Now I can go use a VA loan with that same entitlement elsewhere. Now, if you sell or let a civilian or somebody who did not have entitlement, so if it's a service member who doesn't have remaining entitlement and you let them take over, or a civilian or somebody who does not rate certificate of eligibility, like does not have entitlement for the VA loan, takes over your mortgage on the VA loan. At that point, or if you fail to get the substitution of entitlement, at that point, you as the seller do not regain your entitlement until that mortgage is paid to zero, whether that's through a refi or a sale of the house where they pay off the mortgage. Which means that if you were selling the house to move across country and use the VA loan again, you may not be able to, or at least you may have to pay 25% down. Or, if you're selling a $300,000 house, you're moving to another market that's $300,000, you might still be able to, right? But if you're selling a $800,000 house, well, sorry, your entitlement's tapped. And if you don't get it back by selling to somebody who's qualified and substituting the entitlement, you're screwed, right? So you need to be aware of that. You can sell to somebody who's not eligible, so don't buy into the lie that you can't. It can go. This is what's cool. The VA loan can be assumed by somebody who's not eligible for the VA loan. You will lose entitlement. So you need to be aware of that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Like if you weren't planning on using the VA loan again right away, you might be fine with that. All right, let's talk through the how real quick. How does this work? How do you find one of these things? Cool. Couple of tips for how you might find some of these. And this is kind of a new thing, right? So I got to talk to a buddy. So I got a buddy who runs Military by Owner. And we're going to talk through like some ways to maybe see if we can find out. We talked about it briefly, but we're going to see if we can figure out how to find some of these. There's got to be a way to actually make it easy to be like, I'd like to buy a VA loan assumption. Like, there's got to be a way to. I'll tell you right now, if you're not in my Facebook group, you should be. People are throwing them up all over the place right now. Hey, I'm thinking about moving. If you're interested in buying a in this area, I would be willing to let you assume my mortgage. Here's the property. Hit me up. Like, that's happened probably 5 times this week alone. I've seen 2 or 3 in Virginia. And yes, you got to have the money for the down, like, or there's other options. But, like, realistically, people are open to it. They're posting it even just in my Facebook group. So it is becoming more common. Like, I've never seen that up until probably 6 months ago. But now, in the last month, it's like it's picking up, right? Because people are PCSing and they've got great loans. And they're willing to say, hey, you want my loan? Like, rather than selling the house to somebody who's going to get stuck with a high interest rate, like, just take over my loan, give me cash, and we'll move on. So it's cool. So, okay, so a real estate agent can help you out, right? Great. As always, if you'd like an introduction to a really solid real estate agent in your area, hit me up or click on my website, and this button says recommended agents. We've got a solid list. Also, if you're thinking about becoming a real estate agent, we are building a team to help service members and vets become agents. So you can join my team. Multiple listing service, the MLS, easy. You can actually, I bet you what's going to happen now is you can probably go in there and search assumable, that word, or assumption, either of those words, and I bet you'll be able to find these mortgages. Print ads, that's a bit archaic, but maybe they'll be in your newspaper. I don't know. Specialized websites, so like takelist.com or Zumption.com, they're willing to undergo assumption process. So take a look at those. I didn't play around with them too much, but and then like I said, I'm looking to I'm talking with my buddy. We're gonna see if we can figure this out with maybe military by owner or whatever. But jump in my Facebook group. They're popping up all over the place there. So post where you're at, and if you're if you're looking to move and buy somewhere, like, hey, I'm looking to move here. Anybody looking to sell a house that would be willing to assume have their mortgage assumed, whatever. All right, so how to take advantage. So here are the requirements to assume a loan, right? Okay, so the purchase must be, you have to intend to occupy as your primary residence. We already talked about that. Must be purchased, minimum credit score. There's not a minimum requirement, but most lenders want to see a 620 if they're going to let you assume. Now I've seen as low as like 560, 580, but that's kind of the norm with the assumptions is like 680. They want to see a little bit higher, I think, for the assumptions. You've got to have a back-end debt-to-income ratio of 45% or better. So basically, got to make enough money for the debt-to-income to actually support the loan amount. Funding fee 0.5%, and you got to make a down payment that's equal to the difference. So if it's a $190,000 remaining mortgage, $250,000 purchase price, you've got to fork the $60,000 difference, right? Somehow, some way. There are other ways to do it. We'll get there. Okay, exception. So here are the exceptions to VA approval. So if the these are so according to the VA guidelines, these situations do not require the VA approval in order to execute. So if the borrower's death and the loan was assumed by a relative, transfer occurred due to legal separation or divorce, assumption not require transfer of rights because the owner remained in the beneficiary, assumption occurred as a result of spouse or child becoming a joint owner. It required the creation of subordinate to the lender's security instrument, not include the transfer of occupancy rights. Security interest in the household appliances for purchase money was created in the assumption. Okay, so let's see. One other thing. Okay, so yeah, talked about funding fee, cash to close, financing stuff. We're going to get to good stuff in a minute. Am I missing anything in here so far? Okay, no. So why does this matter in 2023? So I'm going to just read a quick little bit of bullet point here, and then I'm going to talk to you straight up about why this is important. So the math here is, let's say, for ease of math, I compared a $500,000 note, right? So a $500,000 mortgage at 3%, 6%, and 8%. So at 3%, which is, 2 years ago, a $500,000 mortgage was $2,108 a month. At 6% interest, which was like 4 months ago, that was $2,998. And at 8% interest, which was when I wrote this, but I don't think it is anymore, was $3,669 a month. So, the difference between a 3% and an 8% rate is significant, right? That's huge. And then the other thing too is like with the amortization cycle, right? So I mean, man, I did a ton of math, so I'm not going to bore you by reading through that whole thing. If you want to see all the math and you want to see how it all breaks out with like picking it up like year 2 and or year 2 years into the amortization cycle and how much more of your payment goes to principal rather than interest, it's actually really interesting because of how amortization cycles work. So I kind of did some of that math out. So go check out the blog post if you want to go way more into detail on all this and see like how much more like it's super cool because like 2 years into an amortization cycle, on a it depends on your interest rate and your purchase price and all that, but let's say it was a $500,000 house and you had a really low interest rate. Like 2 years into the amortization cycle, each time you make that monthly payment, you're probably paying $200 or $300 or $400 more towards principal than when you originally started paying the loan. So that means that if you take over 2 years in, the original guy, or girl, whatever, their first 2 years of payments weren't as effective towards paying down the note as where you're starting. It's like, it'd be like, if you imagine like you're pushing a flywheel, and you start pushing and it barely moves, and you start pushing and it barely moves, and then as you're trying to push this thing, it slowly starts to spin, and as it spins, it slowly starts to spin faster, and as it gains momentum, it becomes easier to spin, and and then like you finally get it to start moving, and then you're like, fuck, I'm tired, and you just hand it to someone else, and then now you, the new guy, you come in and you're like, wow, it's moving, this isn't so bad. Now you get to push it all the way through to when it's moving on its own, and then you're like, just push this all through to the end. Like, that's kind of what this amortization cycle's like. It's like someone got this freaking thing to start moving, and all you got to do is take it to the finish line. Pretty sweet. So that's huge. Okay, so why does it matter in 2023? Dude, rates suck, and if you can jump in on an incredible rate as the market kind of like maybe dips back down a little bit, maybe not, you jump in on this incredible rate. Here's the kicker. Some of the stuff that you can probably mess with here is like, so that additional, let's say you got to come out of pocket $100,000, like you're buying a $600,000 house, there's a $500,000 note. You can ask the seller to carry the difference. There's nothing that says you can't come in and say, hey, I'd like to assume your $500,000 VA loan that's at 2.5%. However, I don't have the $100,000 down. So I'm going to live in the house. I would like to pay you 5% interest on the $100,000 as a seller finance, amortized at whatever percent, right? And maybe, because of the way that everything works out, you can even be like, look, I'll pay it back over 60 months. Like, major payments on that. You just suck it up. I don't know. However it works, right? Or 30-year amortization, but I'll balloon payment it out in 5 years or 10 years. However that works for you. Or maybe you can find someone who does a second position. Or, or you have the cash and you pay it. And, that stinks, but it's not any different than if you put 20% down on a conventional loan, except you locked in a 2.5% rate instead of the 7, 8, 9% you'd be paying right now. But I think there's actually going to be a point where if prices drop, you're going to be able to buy like almost at loan balance with that great rate. So 2023 is going to be an interesting year. VA loan assumptions are going to be sweet, so definitely keep your eye out on them. Sellers can carry a second. There's definitely some creative ways to play around with this. We already talked about affecting entitlement. Let me just run through my pros and cons list real quick, and then I'll touch through the last couple bullet points, and I'll let you get on your merry way. Okay, pros of assuming a VA loan. This just kind of wraps it all up. So a potential buyer isn't required to be eligible for the VA loan. Awesome. Funding fee and closing costs are reduced. Awesome. Possibility to take over lower interest rate. Yep, but it's definitely lower than current economy. Whatever veteran assumes the mortgage sellers will be able to regain their full entitlement. Cons. Seller's credit score could be negatively affected. So if the buyer defaults on the loan or makes a late payment before the liability is transferred. So, the lender will hold the initial borrower responsible for the payment until there's a release of liability, which could take some time depending on the lender. So you just need to make sure that you push for that release of liability to get done quickly. So that is one downside. If the release of liability is not done and the new borrower defaults or makes late payments, it could tap your credit. But you can get that, resolved down the line, and ultimately it shouldn't take that long to get the release of liability done. So I'm sure there's actually ways to get around that with an attorney or whatever to, cover your ass. Seller may have to forfeit their entitlement if the buyer is not eligible. Seller will remain liable for the loan until they relieve. Oh, we already touched on that. Release of liability. Buyer may have to make a down payment. Yep, covered that. Lenders are not required to approve the assumption. Most will, as long as you're qualified. And yeah, depending on your lender, it can be a lengthier process, right? So, if you're talking to big box lenders, it might suck. But yeah. So here's some frequently asked questions. Okay, so how much of a down payment is required? We already talked about that. Can they carry a second position? Yes. Okay, so as far as other loans that are assumable, the FHA loan, also assumable, pretty similar to the VA loan. FHA, VA loan, fairly similar, both generally assumable, both blah, 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 blah. The USDA loan, also assumable, but the majority of them, from what I understand, the rate and terms will actually change. So it's almost like you're assuming the remaining note, but you're going to get new rates and terms. So it's like a new mortgage, but with the it doesn't seem like an actual assumption. Sometimes it'll stay with the same rate and terms. Doesn't seem super advantageous. Conventional seems like it's really rare because of the due on sale clause. It seems like they don't really like you to actually do assumptions. Okay, so super legit note-taking skills. Looks like I covered it all. Right, so bottom line is this. VA loan's assumable. VA loan is still, in my opinion, the single best loan product on the market. If an agent or lender, as always, I'm telling you, if an agent or lender is telling you that the VA loan is not competitive, it's because they're not an expert, right? It's not their fault. I'm licensed as an agent. I'm licensed as a lender. I don't actively do either. I just got licensed because I do referrals, right? I recommend people and I get a small cut of their commission for making introductions because I have a big network of vetted people that I know and trust and whatever, and I make connections because I'm a connector. That's what I do. And so I don't actively do the piece, but that means I work with a ton of people, and I'm basically like an unbiased third party because I get to basically my entire revenue source is based on how well these other agents and lenders actually transact, right? It's not based on a bias of how good I am. And so I see a lot of this and I hear a lot of this, like my agent said this and my lender said this. And the reality is, like, I can tell you from being licensed in both, they teach you what the VA loan is and they teach you what the FHA loan is. But the information they give you about the VA loan is like zero down, entitlement, who's eligible. It's the basics. They don't teach you anything about the nuances. So being licensed does not mean that you know jack shit about how to actually use the VA loan, right? And being licensed and a veteran also doesn't mean that you know jack shit about using the VA loan, right? So just keep that in mind. There are tons of really solid agents out there and lenders who are veterans. Not dogging on that. I'm just saying you really need to know that the person you're working with actually did a deep dive in the guidelines. And if they are not willing to pick up the phone when you write an offer, call the listing agent and sell the VA loan and sell you as a buyer to that listing agent, you've got the wrong person. And if they're going to tell you that your offer is less competitive and your VA loan is less competitive for XYZ reason, you've got the wrong professional in your corner. And I'm sorry. I'd be happy to help you out. I'm not trying to steal you away from professionals, but I just hate to see veterans getting screwed like that. Because we have helped people, all 50 states, in the hottest market that this nation's seen in God knows how long, buy over $50 million worth of real estate in the last 2 years with no freaking issue, including like $1.93 million duplex in fucking Venice Beach, California in 2021 in the freaking height of the craziness, 0 down. Got a guy right now who's about to buy a $2.6 million house in Dallas area, 0 down. Like, the VA loan's competitive. Like, there's some crazy stories out there that I could tell you. So, don't mean to ramble. I just figure if you're going to watch this VA assumption video all the way through, like, this is a good point to throw in here and just say, look, make sure you're covering your ass. Make sure you're taking care of. Make sure you're working with the right people. Have a great freaking day. Make sure you subscribe. Join the Facebook group if you're not in it already, because it's amazing. The best military real estate investing community in the world. I know there's another Facebook group that'll get mad if I say we're the biggest real estate community in the world. They just seem to forget that there's a whole bunch of other platforms. So, you know, it is what it is. We are the biggest military real estate investing community in the world, not Facebook group, just actual community. So if you look at all the other platforms, do the math. Have a great day.